Crazy Train Guy presents an Okanagan Valley Railway production. Another episode of How Did He Do That? Today we're going to talk about how I built this drop section. During the construction of my mall railway, I came to a point where I had to cross the doorway, thus the need for a drop section on the layout. I've never been very crazy about drop sections, but this one's about 58 inches off the ground, so more of a nod under, a stoop under, which makes it easy on the backs of the operators, as this section has to be in place during operation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through this. Basically, the construction resulted in a relatively simplistic design. I was trying to avoid some of the more complex ones I've seen in some of the magazines with regards to both construction and electronics. So following through the steps, like I said, this is a fairly simple and low-cost project, and I hope you enjoy it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step through different sections. I'm going to start with the construction of the drop section. I'm going to talk a bit about the installation of the hardware, the laying of the track, the wiring, and some last touches and adjustments that I had to make. So here we go. So basically, as you can see, I've removed the bumper section off the front to show you what the drop section is made of. Basically, it's a half-inch piece of plywood. And so the main thing here you need to do is line it up with each section. Now, the reason I use plywood is that it isn't as susceptible to humidity as regular lumber is. And I live in a part of the world where there are 4 seasons, and so we can tend to get a fair bit of humidity here. So the other thing was with regards to the construction, once again, I mentioned about the approaches. So you need to make sure you line that up. And then what I did is I had my piece selected and I carefully cut it. If you're like me, you may want to make sure that if anything, you cut it a little bit too long, but make sure you measure it carefully, because you get one chance where you gotta get a new piece of wood, and that's a real drag. In addition to the half-inch plywood, I also installed 2 blocks, one at each end. They're 3/4 inch thick. So these blocks of wood, what they do is, you can see the hardware underneath, and I'll get to that later. Basically, that hardware, I want to be able to screw in firmly underneath the drop section, and so that block ensures that the screws aren't going to pop through the plywood. And there's the one at the other end right there. One of the druthers of this drop section is that it is on a grade. I don't necessarily recommend building a drop section on a grade. Typically, they are usually level. In this case, I had to do that as this track goes into my staging yard in the other room. That room is not a full-size room. It is a duck under room underneath our laundry room. And with the lower ceiling, I had to have a fairly steep grade in order to clear piping and such. So in the end, it worked out okay. The drop section works fine and everything, but it's just one of those things I wouldn't generally recommend unless you have to do it. Now the hardware, as I showed you earlier, it's basically the slide bolts you would find on any given door. You'll see there's 2 here, and there's one over here, as well as the hinge on this side as well. So that's basically the hardware that I purchased for this. You have to make sure that if you're going to use hardware, and I'm using it also as a conductor, so you have to use brass, do not use zinc. In addition to that, you can see the other end of the slide bolt, and you have to make sure there is as you can see, there's a distinct gap. The reason there has to be a gap is, and I'll get to that in the wiring section below, but they cannot touch,
because you do not want conductivity when you do not have this the bolts unslid. It's the same thing over on that side. Okay. Now what I did is I initially installed the hinge on this end. I then installed the slide bolts on this end to make sure I had everything lined up over here. So I did it in steps. And then once that was done, then I put the final slide bolt in over here to ensure that it was all lined up. Another little piece of advice is before you're screwing everything in, I drilled pilot holes, which makes it a lot easier initially when you're putting in screws, especially when you're doing them upside down. The next project then was to lay the track. So first what I did is I put down cork row bed, and it overlapped right over the right into the section on each side past the actual drop section. And then I did the same with the track. So this section here is actually a bit longer than 3 feet. So what I did is I put in a joint right there, and that ensured that the flex track, especially you can see as there's a corner going through the tunnel, so that had to be nicely lined up. So that ensured I had a nice good alignment on both ends there. Once that was in place, I was able to cut it with just my hobby tool and make a nice alignment there. That is so important, that you have to have your track in good alignment for this to work. By the way, this is code 100 Pico track, but you know, whatever you're using, code 83 or etc., the principle would be the same. Okay, I've got the safety bumper back in place here. You can never be too cautious, as they say. So next is the wiring. So once again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I wanted to keep it rather simplistic, and so that's what I did here. So what I did is the live section here is actually the drop section, and then the slide bolts, by being in place, actually provide power to the approach tracks on either side. So you'll notice you can hear the engine on the left running there, DC sound. And so what happens is when I pull the slide bolts across like this, lo and behold, you lose that, you lose your conductivity, and that's a safety feature. You don't have your engines falling on the floor. Okay, I've slid the bolt back in place. So let me now run the engines across the gap. Okay, so I run them across the gap, and I will now slide this bolt across. See, same result. Another point here I want to make is that one of the issues I've had is with regards to the slide bolt. When this part goes down, you can see that the hinge is up here, and that this comes down, and it was touching this part here. So as you can see, I put some electrical tape in there just to ensure that it is insulated and to prevent any potential contact on that one when the drop section is down, and prevent any train disaster. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to lower the drop section. Okay, so it just drops down like that. And as you can see, it doesn't obstruct the door entrance at all. Also, you may notice that my HO vehicles haven't gone rolling onto the floor. Well, they're secured in place. So anyway, it's just an additional thing I have going there, which is nice. So last touches and adjustments. So basically, last touches and adjustments. I, after operating the drop section, after a bit, it became very evident that the vertical alignment wasn't very good at the end with the two slide bolts. So what I did is, you can see this piece of wood here, it actually overlaps. So what that does is that helps with the vertical, because the other piece, when it comes in place here, when I raise it up, it abuts right against like that. So that ensures a a nice vertical alignment. On the other side, your hinge should ensure that on that end, and I've had no issue on that end of the drop section. So as I mentioned, I added some basic scenery here, and what I did is I had to make sure that the backdrop is about 3.5 inches total shorter than the actual drop section. The reason for that is when you fold it down, you have to watch it doesn't bump against the because you had an angle there. Otherwise, it's going to hit at the end, at this end of the drop section goes down, and you want to avoid that. So, and then lastly, as I mentioned, I put the foam section on this side, but the other side too, just as an added precaution, I put a very highly visible warning section on this side. That way, then people are walking, and you'd be surprised. I even had one guy walk into it, even with this, but it does definitely help. It makes it very visible that, hey, there's something in your way. Don't walk into it and bang your head. So basically, what I have now in place, I have a drop section that it works. Like I said, it was fairly easy to build, fairly inexpensive. The materials, as you saw, were pretty short list there, and I'm able to operate the layout and have trains run across the entrance without any incident, and when the drop section is down, no trains on the floor. Anyways, thank you for watching. If you like what you saw, please hit the like button or even subscribe to my channel. Take care.